So the next chapter, chapter 18, that is called the Divine Worker. The Divine Worker is a wonderful chapter, speaks of the Karma Yogi. To attain to the divine birth, the divinizing new birth of the soul into a higher consciousness, and to do divine work, both as a means towards that before it is attained, and as an expression of it after it is attained, is then all the Karma Yoga of the Gita. A very important chapter for those who are living in the world, who are acting in the world, who are doing business, who are working in the world, who have not become sannyasins and taken monkhood, but want to realize the divine through offering and action, through their work. This chapter is the kernel of the chapter of Karma Yoga of the Gita. Talks about the principles of Karma Yoga in the Gita. So it starts with the following words. To attain to the divine birth, a divinizing new birth of the soul, a divinizing new birth of the soul into a higher consciousness, and to do divine works, both as a means towards that before it is attained, and as an expression of it after it is attained. So, do you understand that? You do divine works even though you, as a way of attaining that divine new birth of the soul into the higher consciousness. So, to attain it, you have to do divine work, you have to do work for the divine in the right way. And after you've attained that consciousness of the divine, of the new birth, of the higher consciousness, then also you do divine work as a way, it is then as an offering. So then you become the divine worker, the karma yogin. So this is very interesting. To do divine works both as a means towards, it's also the means towards that before it is attained, and as an expression of it after it is attained, is then all the karma yoga of the Gita. The Gita does not try to define works by an outward, by any outward signs through which it can be recognizable to an external gaze, measurable by the criticism of the world. It deliberately renounces even the ordinary ethical distinctions by which men seek to guide themselves in the light of the human reason. Very, very important. So the Gita does not try to define works by any outward signs, any recognizable by the external gaze, measurable by criticism of the world. It deliberately renounces even the ordinary ethical distinctions by which men seek to guide themselves in the light of the human reason. The signs by which it distinguishes divine work are all profoundly intimate and subjective. The stamp by which they are known is invisible, spiritual, super ethical. So how are they recognizable? When it completely renounces the ethical distinction of good work and bad work, work that is, for the divine, work that is not there. So, there is a part where somebody asks Sri Aurobindo, he said, if I was asked by the divine to take up with business, I would do that as the work given by the divine. But I've been asked to take up politics, so I have taken up the politics of this country where he, brought out the first idea of freedom. So that way, all of us are doing works. This idea of morality that distinguishes divine work and other works, completely you have to let go of that, and then only will you be able to see whether somebody is doing karma yoga or not. So what are the signs? If this it talks, these are internal things. They are recognizable only by the light of the soul from which they come. Right? The signs by which it distinguishes divine words are all profoundly intimate and subjective. They're not objective. The stamp by which they are known is invisible, spiritual, supra ethical. They are recognizable only by the light of the soul from which they come. For it says, what is action and what is inaction? As to this, even the sages are perplexed and deluded, because judging by practical, social, ethical, intellectual standards, they discriminate by accidentals and do not go to the root of the matter. I will declare to thee that action by the knowledge of which thou shalt be released. I will declare to thee that action by the knowledge of which thou shalt be released from all ills. One has to understand about action as well as to understand about wrong action and about inaction. One has to understand. Thick and tangled is the way of work. So this is a direct quotation from the Gita, translated in English by Sri Aurobindo. I will declare to thee that action by the knowledge. I will declare to thee that action by the knowledge of which thou shalt be released from all ills. One has to understand about action, as well as to understand about wrong action, and about inaction, one has to understand. Thick and tangled is the way of work. Action in the world is like a deep forest, Ghana, Ghana, through which man goes stumbling as he best can. Through which man goes stumbling as best he can, by the light of the ideas of his time, the standards of his personality, his environment, or rather of many times, many personalities, layers of thought and ethics from many social stages, all inextricably confused together, temporal and conventional, amidst all their claim to absoluteness and immutable truth, empirical and irrational, in spite of their aping of right reason. And finally, the sage, seeking in the midst of it all a highest foundation of fixed law and an original truth, finds himself obliged to raise the last supreme question, whether all action in life itself are not a delusion and a snare, and whether cessation from action, akarma, is not the last resort of the tired and disillusioned human soul. So, um, there is so much of confusion. There are so many layers of thought, and so many social stages and temporal and conventional conventions that have been coming through. Um, and that actually, what is action in the world is like a deep forest canal through which man goes stumbling as best he can, um, by the light of the ideas of his time and the standards and so on. So then he goes on to say that with and also then the question comes that is action after a while man gets so exhausted with trying to find this fixed law and original truth that he begins to almost wonder whether all action in life itself are a delusion, is a mithya, is a Maya, and whether cessation from action, a karma, is not the last resort of the tired and disillusioned youths. But, says Krishna, in this matter, even the sages are perplexed and deluded. For by action, by works, not by inaction, comes the knowledge of the release. So in this matter, even the sages are deluded whether action is better, inaction is better, karma is better, karma is better. What kind of karma? What is karma? What are the rules of conduct, and so on? Is you know is in the end cessation from action the final release? But says Krishna in this matter, for by action, by works, not by inaction, comes the knowledge and the release. So it is not by inaction, not by refusing to work, by renunciation comes the knowledge and the release. So what then is the solution? What is that type of works by which we shall be released from the ills of life? So then this question comes, what is the solution? What is that type of works by which we shall be released from the ills of life, from this doubt, this error, this grief, from this mixed, impure, and baffling results, even of our purest and best intentioned acts? So the result is always a bit confused, baffling, mixed, of even our most purest and best intentioned acts from these million forms of evil and suffering. So this is the question that is raised here. What then is the solution? What kind of works can release us from all of this? No outward distinctions need to be made, is the reply. This is not something done outwardly. You cannot outwardly say that this is the path, this is the work that will release you from the ills of life, from your error and grief, and this work is pure and this work is impure, and so on. And this work, so no outward distinctions need be made, is the reply. No work the world needs be shunned. No work the world needs be shunned. No limit or hedge set round our human activities. On the contrary, all actions should be done. On the contrary, all actions should be done, but from a soul in yoga with the divine. But from a soul in yoga with the divine. Yoga is in union. Yoga here is used in the word of its original meaning, in union, yoked together. So all action should be done from a soul yoked to the divine. Yukta Krishna karma karma. A karma, cessation from action, is not the way. The man who has attained to the insight of the highest reason perceives that such inaction is itself a constant action. Now, this is a very, very important concept, an idea that comes up very often in the Gita, and then, of course, is taken further on later in the philosophy, in our Indian philosophy. And that is that there is nothing like inaction or karma. You cannot for one moment live or exist without some form of action, whether that action is a mental action, a physical action, or an emotional action. So a karma, cessation from action, is not the way. The man who has attained to the insight of the highest reason perceives that such inaction is itself a constant action. So, this perception that such inaction is itself a constant action comes when you have the insight of the highest reason, a state subject to the workings, a state subject to the workings of nature and her qualities. So, this is important. A karma cessation from action is not the way. The man who has attained to the insight of the highest reason perceives that such inaction is itself a constant action, a state subject to the workings of nature, Prakriti, and her qualities, the gunas. What are the three gunas? Yes, Sattva, Tamas, and Rajas. The mind that takes refuge in physical inactivity, the mind that takes refuge in physical inactivity is still under the delusion that it and not nature is the doer of work. It has mistaken inertia for liberation. It does not see that even in what seems absolute inertia, greater than that of the stone or clod, nature is at work. Even in that which is absolute inertia, it is not it, not the mind that is at work, but nature is at work. Keeps unimpaired her form. So this is important. Is it clear? Is it clear? Okay. The mind that takes refuge in physical inactivity is still under the delusion that that is the mind, the human, that ego, that it and not nature is the doer of work. Therefore, it takes refuge in physical inactivity, thinking that if I don't act at all, then there is no action. But that is not true, because it is not that which acts, it is nature who acts. It is Prakriti and the gunas that act. So the mind that takes refuge in physical inactivity, in samadhi, is still under the delusion that it and not nature is the doer of works. It has mistaken inertia for liberation. It does not see that even in what seems absolute inertia, greater than that of the stone or clod, nature is at work, keeps unimpaired her hold. On the contrary, in the full flood of action, the soul is free from all its works. On the contrary, in the full flood of action, the soul is free from its works, is not the doer, not bound by what is done. And he who lives in the freedom of the soul, not in the bondage of the modes of nature, alone has release from work. This is what the Gita clearly means when it says that he who in action can see inaction and can see action still continuing in cessation from works is the man of true reason and discernment amongst men. This saying hinges upon the Sankhya distinction between Purusha and Prakriti, between the free inactive soul, eternally calm, pure and unmoved in the midst of works, and ever active nature, operative as much in inertia and cessation as in the overt turmoil of her visible hurry of labor. This is the knowledge which the highest effort of the discriminating reason, the buddhi, gives to us. And therefore, whoever possesses it in the truly rational and discerning man, sa buddhiman manushya, manusheshu, not the perplexed thinker who judges life and works by the external, uncertain, impermanent distinctions of the lower reason. Therefore, the liberated man is not afraid of action. He is a large and universal doer of all works. Therefore, the liberated man is not afraid of action. He is a large and universal doer of all works. Krishna Karmakrit, not as others do them, in subjection to nature, but poised, in the silent calm of the soul, tranquilly in yoga with the divine. The divine is the Lord of his works. He is only their channel through the instrumentality of his nature, conscious of and subject to her Lord. By the flaming intensity and purity of this knowledge, all his works are burned up as in a fire, and his mind remains without any stain or disfiguring mark from them. Calm, silent, unperturbed, white and clean and pure, to do all in this liberating knowledge without the personal egoism of the doer is the first sign of the divine work. So this is the first sign of the divine worker when you're able to work with this in this liberating knowledge of not being the doer of works and yet working as and doing all works as as an offering to the divine without the personal egoism of the doer, that you think that it is you who are doing the works and that you who are responsible for the success of these works or the failure is the first sign of the divine. The second sign is freedom from desire. So they were going into the divine worker and the signs. We will read this last passage again next time, but we at least have made a beginning into the next chapter. Any thoughts, questions, contemplations? Or
Very dense.
very
Dense.
dense?
I have a question. I've been thinking about this from the last chapter where you said where Aurobindo said that there's a reincarnation of Asuric presences on Earth and the Avatar. So is
Yeah.
this inevitable cycle that just continues and continues? Is there an end to it?
Hmm. There will be an end to it when human nature turns into the divine nature, as and if those who have read Sri Aurobindo, that is his philosophy and his yoga, that there will be a new age and a new consciousness where the mind and the ego will be transformed, and that there will be a higher consciousness that will descend into mankind in the collective. And when that happens, the need for the asura, the need for the anti-divine forces will not be there. So there will be an end to it. But whether that means that there will be no more requirement for the descent of the divine into mankind, like as the avatar, I don't know. I would imagine that if that something else then takes over, which our mind today can't conceive because we're still limited in our thought, bound by our reason and egoistic way of thinking, and haven't attained that level of consciousness to be able to perceive what the future might be like.
Thank you.
When you were reading earlier on page 174, for the avatar here, though he is manifest in the name and form of Krishna, lays no exclusive stress on this one form of his human birth, but on that which it represents, the divine, the Purushottama, of which all avatars are the human births, of whom all forms and names of the Godhead worshipped by men are the figures. I was thinking, what a solution that would be to the problems in the world, because most of the reason for contention between people stems from the idea that that their particular vision or their name for the divine is the only way.
It's the only way.
And
Yeah.
and so this is the root, very at the very source level. This is the problem for humanity.
Yes, absolutely. Even within the Muslims, you see the Shiite and the Sunni Muslims, they are killing each other. Within one religion, forget about other religions. Everybody's at war with the other because of this sense of being entitled, as though this is the only way. So it is certainly a solution if one can embrace that universality of consciousness and this idea that all paths lead to the divine. And that is, it's a liberating thought, but it certainly will lead to a lot of peace in this world, as you rightly point out.
Be nice if this could be promoted or on the world stage,
I
this
know.
idea.
But the Gita is written 4,000 years ago, and everybody gives lectures on it, but we don't see this particular part coming out as
Mm,
often. Mhm.
yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks for reading.
Thank
Very
you.
nice.
Right, so we end with 1 minute of concentration. We were on the Divine Worker, uh, page 179, the Divine Worker, this third page of the chapter. So because there's been a bit of a break, let me just highlight some of the important points, and then we continue to read where we left off. To attain to the divine birth. Now, this is a very important way that the chapter begins. What is the aim of the divine worker or of the karma yoga of the Gita? It is to attain to the divine birth, not the human birth, but the divine birth, a divinizing new birth of the soul. So, a new birth of the soul into a higher consciousness. And to do divine works both as a means towards that before it is attained. What is attained? The divine birth and the divine consciousness or the higher consciousness. So, to attain the higher consciousness, one does work to do divine works both as a means and as a way of attaining to this higher consciousness. And then later, after one has attained this divine new birth of consciousness, then as an expression of it, uh, after it is attained, is then all the karma yoga of the Gita. Now, this first line of the chapter, The Divine Worker, chapter 17, chapter 18 actually, um, explains the whole idea of karma yoga of the Gita. This is the karma yoga of the Gita. This is the aim, this is the method, and this is the goal. So the Gita does not try to define works by any outward signs which are recognizable. It deliberately renounces the ordinary ethical distinctions by which men seek to guide themselves by the light of the reason. However, the signs by which it distinguishes divine works are all profoundly intimate and subjective. The stamp by which they are known is visible, and the stamp by which they are known is invisible, spiritual, and supra-ethical. So this is a very important thing. The Gita goes on to say that action in the world is like a deep forest, ghana, through which man goes stumbling as best as he can. And therefore, um, he has to find something that will help him and guide him through this action to discriminate and to take the right course. And that he does by, and finally, the sage, seeking in the midst of it all a highest foundation of fixed law and an original truth, finds himself obliged to raise the last supreme question, whether all action and life itself are not a delusion and a snare, and whether cessation from action, a karma, is not the last resort. Now, here in this particular page, the distinction is made between karma and akarma. A karma is inertia, not taking any action, and that it says is a delusion because whether we like it or not, we are always acting. The only thing is that like the Sankhya yoga and the Sankhya philosophy that we studied earlier, it is nature who is acting. It is not the soul. And therefore, nature will act whether it is in an inert stone or invisible or visible. And therefore, one cannot run away from action. So, to become completely inert and say, I will do no physical work and I will not act, and therefore I will go towards liberation is a big mistake. Okay? A karma cessation from action is not the way. The man who has attained to the insight of the highest reason perceives that such inaction is itself a constant action, a state subject to the workings of nature, and so on. The mind that takes refuge in physical inactivity is still under the delusion that it and not nature is the doer of works. So those who do this physical inactivity are still under the delusion that it, the ego, and not nature is the doer of works. It has mistaken inertia for liberation. It does not see that even in what seems absolute inertia, greater than that of the stone or cloud, nature is at work, keeps unimpaired a hold. On the contrary, in the full flood of action, the soul is free from its works, not the doer, not bound by what is done. And he who lives in the freedom of the soul, not in the bondage of the modes of nature, alone has release from works. This is what the Gita clearly means when it says that he who in action can see inaction and can see action still continuing in cessation from works is the man of true reason and discernment. This saying hinges upon the Sankhya distinction between Purusha and Prakriti. Now, um, this then he goes on to say that therefore the liberated man is not afraid of action. He is a large and universal doer of all works. Krishna Karmakrit, not as others do them in subjection to nature, but poised in the silent calm of the soul, tranquilly in yoga with the divine. So the liberated man is not afraid of action. In fact, he's a large and universal doer of all works. Krishna Karmakrit, not as others do, by in subjection to nature, but poised in the silent calm of the soul. The divine is the Lord of his works. He is only their channel through the instrumentality of his nature, conscious, often subject to her Lord. By the flaming intensity and purity of this knowledge of all. Now, this is important. By the flaming intensity and purity of this knowledge, what knowledge? That he is not the doer, it is the divine who is doing the works, and that he will do all the works that are required of him in tranquility, in yoga. By doing this, by the flaming intensity and purity of this knowledge, all his works are burned up as in a fire, and his mind remains without any stain or disfiguring mark from them. His mind then becomes silent, calm, unperturbed, white and clean and pure. To do all, to do all in this liberating knowledge that one is not the doer, and that one still has to do whatever works is required and does them freely and universally, without the personal egoism of the doer, is the first sign of the divine worker. So, how does one know? And what are the signs that can tell us when we have reached the, when we have become the divine worker? What are the signs of the divine worker? How do you distinguish between one person and the other? What they are all in doing in the ashram, or any other place, we are all doing works. How do you distinguish a man who is doing work in the, in karma yoga, in the spirit of karma yoga, and the man who is doing work for himself as the doer and as the feeling that it is for myself that I'm doing this work? What is the distinguishing signs? And this is what here Sri Krishna is teaching Arjun and Sri Aurobindo is illuminating. So, first sign is to do all in this liberating knowledge of not the worker, but the one that is through which the works are going to be the instrument, without the personal egoism of the doer, that I am doing this, I am doing it is my work, that is I am the one who is accomplishing all this, or without me this would not have happened. These are ways, to understand that. So without the personal egoism of the doer is the first sign of the divine worker. Now, this itself, this one, the first sign is itself maybe not very easy to, it is very easy to understand and to, but is it easy to do? And when we are in the field, in the work, are we conscious of doing it like that? We have those moments, we have those periods of the feeling of impersonality, of doing it as a sacrifice to the divine, of making sacred, of remembering and offering. But it is extremely difficult to have completely no personal egoism in action. So this is the first sign of the divine worker. The second sign is freedom from desire. For where there is not the personal egoism of the doer, desire becomes impossible. So this actually is an adjunct. It goes with the other first. Where you don't have the personal egoism of the doer, that I am writing this book, I want to be a great author, or I want to be a great doctor, or whatever it might be. That personal ambition is not there. Then, but you are doing it with the complete understanding that this work is required for the universal working. You're here because you've been charged by the divine to do this work. It is your uh, it is your fate that has brought you to a particular destiny, to a particular place, to a particular work. And then, if you can remember and do whatever works with that offering of inner remembrance of the divine, that allows the personal egoism to become less. When there is no personal egoism, desire becomes impossible. So then the second sign comes in. The second sign is freedom from desire, for where there is not the personal egoism of the doer, desire becomes impossible. It is starved out, sinks for want of a support, dies of in and inanition. Inanition. Is that correct? Inanition. Nice. New word. Inanition. Okay. So this, what normally happens when there is no desire, we become tamasic. Why? Because there is no rajasic push for any kind of personal reward or personal ambition or desire. So then you lose interest. Have you seen that in yourself? So, not to lose interest, but to continue to do it without any desire is very, very difficult because generally one falls into tamas. So, the second sign is freedom from desire. From where there is not the personal egoism of the doer, desire becomes impossible. It is starved out, sinks for want of a support, dies of inanition. Outwardly, the liberated man seems to undertake works of all kinds like other men. So it is very difficult to distinguish from the outward work of one person and another their inward attitude. Outwardly, the liberated man also seems to undertake works, all kinds, like other men, on a large scale perhaps, with a more powerful will and driving force. For the might of the divine will works in his active nature. So this will, this force of works, this kind of power in work is actually the divine force that is acting through us, but we are unaware of it. And therefore, outwardly, both men seem to be driven. Outwardly, the liberated man seems to undertake works of all kinds like other men, on a larger scale perhaps, with a more powerful will and driving force, for the might of the divine will works in his active nature. But from all his inceptions and understandings, the inferior concept and nether will of desire is entirely vanished. Sarve samarambha kama sankalpa avrajitaha. So that is completely, there is no desire, there is no personal desire, there is no personal ambition, there is no personal seeking for name and fame and reward and praise and um, any kind of desire, whether it's desire for wealth, whether it's a desire for name, a desire for anything, uh, recognition. It could be in the most highest or the lowest, smallest form. There is nothing like that. What is there then? So, for the might of the divine will works in his active nature, but from all his inceptions and understandings, the inferior concept and nether will of desire is entirely banished. He has abandoned all attachment to the fruits of his works. And where one does not work for the fruit, but solely as an impersonal instrument of the master of works, desire can find no place. So, would you like to give some examples or your own understanding of this? Because this is a very simple statement, but when you actually begin to dwell on it and try and apply it in your life, it becomes much more difficult. So, have you seen, can you give examples of this kind of work done by whom and how? Yes, Robin?
I think there's a problem here because how do we decide what to do? There's some things in life that we might have a desire to do. And and even if we rise to a point where that desire wanes and is not, a really burning desire to accomplish something, to do something. I mean, I have a couple of things that I would like to do in life,
Yes, yes,
that have no, um, I don't have a real attachment to them, but they're very much personal desires. And and I can only think that in order to achieve this state that he's talking about, you really have to be committed to a life of service, I think. That, serving some greater cause. Then you can act and you can function and have the desire to do something, to accomplish something, but it's not for your own personal benefit. It's for
mm,
some greater good, whether it be for society, for people, for an organization, no matter what it is. Otherwise, like you're saying, you sit and you become tamasic.
mm.
You know, you don't do anything.
You don't do anything,
And,
yes.
desire really is the motivating force in everything. And I see, I just backtracking, desire really, without it, what would we do?
Exactly.
And even the desire to feel bliss, to feel a sense of inner unity and harmony, we
Is
have
a
to
desire.
act. Yeah, it's a desire. So I think getting free of desire is a very, very difficult thing to do. If we have some sort of mission that is altruistic, then and we can catch hold onto that dream, then we can kind of take flight and leave, our personal life and longings behind.
Mm.
But I got a couple of things I want to do. I wouldn't mind doing in life that
Yeah.
that
No, no, I
really
agree with
don't
that.
have to do
And
with
get and
anything altruistic.
yes, no, this is absolutely, everybody's plight, and that's why it's good that you bring it up. And I was hoping that somebody does, because then one can look into that more deeply and understand what he's saying. Because, you have to break it up then and say, look, the first is you cannot completely jump into a complete desireless state without certain intermediate steps. So, therefore, the first step is to recognize and to find something, like you said, an aim that is higher and bigger than yourself, than your own personal well being, your own personal needs, your own personal ambitions, your own personal uh, whatever it might be. So get out of personal, get into the impersonal, and find something that is higher than yourself and greater than yourself. Whether it's society, whether it's the divine, whether it's a feeling that to find out what is the aim of your life, why have you taken birth, what have you been charged with? Hear the intimations of your own inner voice. But the second is, once you have something higher than yourself to work towards, even then desire won't leave, because you can still desire through that recognition, because you're not getting, uh, in the earlier way, may even have a bigger ego, because the altruistic ego is much bigger than the ordinary ego. So then, how do you get rid of this desire? Then the second intermediate step is to remember and offer, to each time call the divine before you start your work and ask the divine to work through you, to speak through you, to think through you, and slowly become like the flute of Krishna, where you become an instrument. And that is the second intermediate step of remembering and offering. That is, remembering the divine in your work before you work. You may forget it while you're working, and that's all right. But that remembrance creates a certain energy in the mind and in the universe that allows the higher consciousness to start working through you without your knowledge, or even with your knowledge, depending on how conscious you are. So that is the second intermediate step. And then the third is when you have this tranquility, this calmness of the soul, that whatever happens, you have done your best, and you leave the fruits or the results of your action to the divine. You put it at his feet. Whether it is success or failure, fame or name, at each moment you said, "This is not mine. I put this at your feet." So constantly that feeling that you're entitled to the work, but you're not entitled to own or to become attached to the fruit of your works, that is the results of your work. So that is a third action. Now all of this will take you a long time. So the natural process of yoga, therefore, requires one to live 100 years. So just to give you a sense of the time it might take. Till then, enjoy the journey. And it is a wonderful journey to be on the journey. Not to attempt it is something is far less, to attempt it each time and to fail is it's far more rewarding than to go after smaller, yeah, or not attempt it, yes, because it's too difficult. Okay, so I think that explains this. The second sign is freedom from desire, but what does he mean by that? He means to become to to uh, to give up the nether, the lower will of desire, to banish that, and he to abandon all attachment to the fruits of your works. And where does one not work for the fruit? And where, this question, very important, where does one not work for the fruit, but solely as an impersonal instrument of the master of works? Desire can find no place. So wherever one works, solely as an impersonal instrument of the master of works, their desire can find no place. Not even the desire to serve successfully. So even that is a desire to serve, to be of service. So these are all different modalities. But so let me read that again. He has abandoned all attachment to the fruits of his works, and where one does not work for the fruit, but solely as an impersonal instrument of the master of works, desire can find no place, not even the desire to serve successfully. For the fruit is the Lord's and determined by Him, and not by the personal will and effort, or to serve with credit and to the master's satisfaction. For the real doer is the Lord Himself, and all glory belongs to a form of His Shakti, missioned in the nature, and not to the limited human personality. So, this real doer is the Lord Himself, and all glory belongs to a form of His Shakti, missioned in the nature to become conscious of that Shakti in you. You will become conscious of it. Something higher and greater working in you, within you. And then to understand that it is that that is working and uplifting you and guiding you and taking you wherever you have to go, protecting you. So, therefore, and determined by him and not by the personal will and effort, or to serve with credit and to the master's satisfaction, for the real doer is the Lord Himself, and all glory belongs to a form of His Shakti, missioned in the nature and not to the limited human personality. The human mind and soul of the liberated man does nothing. So the human mind and soul of the liberated man does nothing. Na kinchit karoti, even though through his nature he engages in action. So if the human mind and soul does nothing, even though through his nature he engages in action, it is the nature, the executive Shakti, it is the conscious goddess governed by the divine inhabitant who does the work. The conscious goddess governed by the divine inhabitant does the work. So that is clear. So what Sri Aurobindo is saying and what Sri Krishna is trying to slowly bring Arjuna towards is that in divine inhabitant that sits within each of us, that is the divine presence. It is that is doing the work, that is the conscious goddess, that is the real doer. Become conscious of that and get out of the outer soul, which is the desire soul, and the ego. So the ego is not the true soul. If you read the chapter on Life Divine, the two souls, the desire soul and the real soul, the distinction is very clear. It does not follow that the work is not to be done perfectly. So, however, with success, now this is very interesting. So then you can become a little sloppy, can you not? The divine is doing this work. I am not attached to this. I don't need to succeed in anything. I can just continue the way I'm doing in my mediocrity, live forever, live in some blissful idea of how much, how I'm how I must be calm and tranquil. So what if nothing is happening? So what if I'm not able to do my work properly? Today I'm sleeping. The divine is sleeping in me. So what if I don't go to work? And so on. You can delude yourself beautifully. So he continues. It does not follow that the work is not to be done perfectly. Now, how do you do the work perfectly without having any desire, without being attached to the results of the work, and yet do your work successfully also? To become absolutely to do it perfectly and successfully, not just perfectly, successfully. So somebody asked Sri Aurobindo when he was in politics and later, no, sorry, when he was in the ashram much later in the evening talks, one of the sadhaks asked him that, sir, if you were to, if suppose it's your lot, instead of politics, if suppose uh, you were asked to do business as a businessman, would you do that, or would you consider, or would you say that that is not part of my spiritual quest or my dharma or my whatever? So, and there's a whole little chapter on it also. It's called "Is Business Tainted?" So he said, no. If the divine brought me to that and said that this is my, if I know, obviously he's conscious of you have to be conscious of your soul to know what is your karma and your dharma. So if you know that this was a lot that life brought me to, instead of politics, I was brought to business, and I had to run a successful shop. I would do it as well and with as much fervor. So that was his reply. It was quite illuminating because in the ashram and in spiritual life, especially, you know, money and wealth are considered somewhat non-spiritual. Those you who walk around, with um, sort of more like a sannyasi, you're considered very pious and spiritual. And here is Sri Aurobindo saying that no, I would do it as with equal fervor, with equal. Uh, so therefore, it doesn't matter what work you're doing. It matters in what spirit you're doing it in, whether you're in the army or whether you're, doing business or whether you're a writer or whether you're a teacher or whether you're a sweeper. It doesn't really matter. It's the spirit. Now, this is extremely important because it goes back to the question of what is your, are you aware of? So she said, follow life. Life will show you where you have to go. And if you are sensitive and conscious, you will know what is your work. So let's continue. Whether all the last, I am digressing today a bit because I really think if I just read through this, it'll just be very nice. You know, um, go deeper and deeper. We need to go deep behind these words and break them up. So it does not follow that the work is not to be done perfectly, with success, with the right adaptation of means to ends. On the contrary, perfect working is easier to action. On the contrary, a perfect working is easier to action done tranquilly in yoga than to action done in the blindness of hopes and fears, lamed by the judgments of the stumbling reason, running about amidst the eager trepidations of the hasty human will. Yoga, says the Gita elsewhere, is the true skill in works. Yoga karmashu poshanam. So, yoga is what? The true skill. The word skill in works denotes perfection, also gives the idea that skillfulness uh, requires a certain amount of, um sorry, mastery, yes. So, yoga, says the Gita elsewhere, is the true skill in works. All this is done impersonally, not personally, by the action of a great universal light and power operating through the individual nature. The Karma Yogin knows that the power given to him will be adapted to the fruit decreed. The divine thought behind the work, equated with the work he has to do, the will in him, which will not be wish or desire, but an impersonal drive of conscious power directed towards an aim not his own, subtly regulated in its energy and direction by the divine wisdom. Now, this idea, this knowledge of that the Karma Yogi knows that the power given to him will be adapted to the fruit decreed. The divine thought behind the work, equated with the work he has to do. The will in him, which will not be wish or desire, but an impersonal drive of conscious power directed towards an aim not his own, subtly regulated in its energy and direction by the divine wisdom. The result may be success, as the ordinary mind understands it, or it may seem to that mind to be defeat and failure, but to him it is always the success intended, not by him, but by the all-wise manipulator of action and results, because he does not seek for victory, but only for the fulfillment of the divine will and wisdom, which works out its ends through apparent failure, as well as often with greater force than through apparent triumph. So this greater will often works out its ends through apparent failure, as well as often with greater force than through apparent triumph. Arjuna, bidden to fight, is assured of victory. But even if certain defeat, even if certain defeat were with before him, he must still fight, because that is the present work assigned to him, as his immediate share in the great sum of energies by which the divine will is surely accomplished. So this is how this impersonal drive of conscious power, this karma, this power that is given to each of us to become aware of, this divine presence that is within us, and that is aware of this higher knowledge, and the importance of the idea that the aim is not for oneself, but a higher and a deeper one. So these are the very important constituents or ingredients that can determine and can move towards something more impersonal. And this impersonality is very important to be a true doer of works of Karma Yoga. The liberated man has no personal hopes. He does not seize on things as his personal possessions. He receives what the divine will brings him, covets nothing, is jealous of none. What comes to him, he takes without repulsion and without attachment. What goes from him, he allows to depart into the world of things without repining or grief or sense of loss. So here are the wonderful signs of the liberated man. So what does the liberated man do? First, he has no personal hopes. He does not seize on things as his personal possession. He knows he is a trustee and that he has a trust that has been given to him. He receives what the divine will brings him. That means that what the divine will brings him, what life brings him, the position or the place that life has chosen for him, all of that he understands and uh, does not become despondent or angry or bitter or cynical and all of those things. Okay, because he's aware. He receives what the divine will brings him. Covets nothing. That means doesn't covet anything, doesn't want anything. Oh, he sees somebody with a wonderful, you know, super jet plane and says, I want now to travel in that. I must own one. So these are coveting, okay, things. You covet whatever is not yours. You want something that you cannot have. That is not the character of the liberated man. He covets nothing, is jealous of none. What comes to him, he takes without repulsion and without attachment. What goes from him, he allows to depart into the world of things without repining or grief or sense of loss. His heart and self are under perfect control. They are free from reaction and passion. They make no turbulent response to the touches of outward things. His action is indeed a purely physical action. Shariram kevalam karma. So his action is indeed a purely physical action. Shariram kevalam karma. For all else comes from above. Is not generated on the human plane. Is only a reflection of the will, knowledge, joy of the divine Purushottama. All else comes from above. It is not generated on the human plane, the vital or the mental or the physical. It comes from above and is a reflection of the will of the divine Purushottama. Therefore, he does not, by a stress on Therefore, he does not, by a stress on doing and its objects, bring about in his mind and heart any of those reactions which we call passion and sin. So, therefore, because he's aware of this, he's conscious of this, he does not, by doing, by even turbulent act, therefore, he does not, by a stress on doing and its objects, bring about in his mind and heart any of those reactions which we call passion and sin. Because sin consists not at all in the outward act, in the outward deed, but in an impure reaction of the personal will, mind, and heart, which accompanies it or causes it. The impersonal, the spiritual, is always pure, apapa vidham, and gives to all that it does its own inalienable purity. This spiritual impersonality is a third sign of the divine will. So we have three signs. What's the first sign? What is the first sign?
Ego didn't work given up.
Sorry? Yes, he doesn't work from the personal ego, but from a larger, higher consciousness that he feels that is guiding him, residing in him, and constantly is aware of that. So the personal ego is not there. Freedom from personal ego. What is the second sign? Freedom from desire and abandoning all attachment to the fruits of the womb. How he does that is by doing this. No attachment. So freedom from desire and from the personal egoism of the doer. Desire becomes impossible. So this freedom from desire and is abandoned all attachment to the fruits of his work, and where one does not work for the fruit, blah blah blah. That is the second. So and then the third is the liberated man has no personal hopes, he does not seize on things, and so on and so forth. That culminates in what he calls as a yes, a spiritual impersonality. This impersonal nature, one needs to have has to begin to get that impersonality in one's nature. How does one do that? How does one become more impersonal? Hmm? No. The impersonality comes when you have first a higher aim and a greater cause. You're aware of the divine working through you. You do not have a reaction on every single thing. You realize that your fame and name or success is due to the divine force. You're also aware that your failure is failure that has been brought to you so that for his purpose, but you will still work as perfectly as you have to. So this impersonality of nature then becomes a kind of a, you are not in passion and sin and reacting and full of the ego. So these are all uh, shariram kevalam karma, but who does all, but is not but for all else comes from, is not generated on the human plane, is only a reflection of the knowledge and joy of the divine. Therefore, he does not, by stress on doing, uh, go into any of these reactions, which we call passion and sin. The sin consists of so and so, so and so, so and so. He has become a soul, but this freedom the liberated soul has attained, for he has cast his personality into the impersonal. The spiritual impersonality is a third sign of the divine worker. All human souls, indeed, who have attained to a certain greatness and largeness, are conscious of an impersonal force, or love, or will, and knowledge working through them. Now note this, all human souls, indeed, who have attained to a certain greatness and largeness are conscious of an impersonal force, or love, impersonal will and knowledge, working through them, but through them, please note, they are aware of this working through, but they are not free from egoistic reactions, sometimes violent enough, of their human personality. But this freedom the liberated soul has attained. So, this freedom the liberated soul has attained. All great people are aware that there is something that is working through them, but they are not aware, but sometimes but still they may not be free from egoistic reactions. But this freedom the liberated soul has attained, for he has cast his personality into the impersonal, where it is no longer his, but is taken up by the divine person, the Purushottama, who uses all finite qualities infinitely and freely, and is bound by none. He has become a soul and ceased to be a sum of natural qualities, and such appearance of personality as remains for the operations of nature is something unbound, large, flexible, universal. It is a free mold for the infinite. It is a living mask of the Purushottama. So he becomes a living mask of the Purushottama. The result of this knowledge, this desirelessness, and this impersonality. So, what is the result of all these three signs? Desirelessness, this knowledge, this desirelessness, and this impersonality is a perfect equality in the soul and nature samatha. Equality is the fourth sign, the divine worker. So we will stop here and meditate on this, read this again before we come back so that we can really deeply try and imbibe and take baby steps towards it and each day try. First, we need to implant this into our consciousness. Then we have to begin to perceive this divine worker that is working through us. Any questions, comments, or reflections?
I have a question. My
Yes,
question
Lena?
is, if you have no desires, then you have no ambition. Or if you have no ambition, you have no desires. And I think that goes hand in hand in my world or in my head, if I can say that.
Okay,
By your thoughts.
so that may or may not be true. Because if you are aware of the ambition that the divine has in you or for you, then you may have no desire, but you may be aware of His working through you and His conscious force working in you for His purpose. Now, that may take some time. It may not be, you may not get that awareness in the beginning, but over time, as you keep doing yoga or doing works as a offering to the divine, slowly this consciousness develops that even your ambition, which you think is yours, is not actually yours. It's the divine's ambition that you are reflecting as yours because you are still attached and functioning from the ego. Once you become aware that of the inner part in you, the soul in you, the divine presence, and of the working of the divine force, there will be a time that you will understand that even when you were acting unconsciously and thinking that it is you who are doing this and have this desire or this ambition, it was not yourself. Therefore, these this for this karma yogic process to take place, it takes time. And in the beginning, we have to act from the ego. Ego is the helper, ego is the bar. Desire is the helper, desire is the bar. Ambition is the helper, ambition is the bar. What does it mean? Helper and Ba. Ba means that in the beginning, when the nature is tamasic, when it is, it needs a spur to achieve, to go and to become, and it's amorphous to become a personality, to form an individual. It needs these things, but after a while, these become great hindrances on the path, and then you have to slowly understand, and that is when the Gita comes in. When you're ready for the Gita, that these are actually things that come from the divine and that you separate yourself from, and you begin to distinguish between the ego and the divine presence, the higher knowledge and the higher force, and what you call as the lower knowledge and the lower forces. I don't know any other way of explaining it. Somebody else can, that'd be nice.
I don't know if
Is
I
that
can explain that necessarily, but I do have a reflection.
okay?
And that is, because we're all involved in something. We're doing something in life. It's hard not to do absolutely nothing. So we're always in pursuit of establishing this harmony, this particular space in our consciousness where the divine can work through us. So
Mm,
there's always this pursuit of perfection internally. And in anything that we do, it doesn't matter what it is, we're always kind of, as I was saying, dancing this dance with the divine. Um, and I think one thing that really brings it out is when there's competition. If you're involved in competition, at some point in your life, um, you have to do things. You have to perform. You're performing to the best of your ability. And there's always internally there should be, I mean, there is in the life of an aspirant, the attempt to act perfectly, to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, and to not miss, to not be lazy, to not miss out on an opportunity. So there's always this working that we're doing to try and get this state of being inside us to act rather than us, working from our physical self, from our personality, from our ego. So I always found competition was a fantastic parallel. So is war. I mean, that's what the Gita is all about. Because the consequences are huge. You win or you lose. You live or you die. And so those ramifications, they're very, very important. And so we're always attempting, I think, to achieve this state of inner perfection. Um, and if we can broach that state where the divine works through us, where we're out of the way, we're not the doer, then magic, this magic can happen.
mm,
All kinds of incredible stuff can happen. And that's really what this art is all about, is being able um, to hear this inner music, to feel it, and to respond to it, to act in accordance with it. And we have to. We're all doing something, so um, we're attempting to achieve this inner perfection. So that's how I see this. And
Yeah.
the result, in some cases, the result does matter. Whatever the consequences are, that's what the divine brings. I mean, whether it's success or failure, we just do our best.
Hmm. Good. Yes, so these are difficult questions, and I think the answer has to unfold for each one of us slowly. But the fact is quite clear that here in the Gita, what Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna is that uh, become impersonal, remember not all your words, understand that it is I who am acting through you. Get into the inner poise of the divine presence that is working in you and through you. Become the flute and understand that I am the player, and get that consciousness through slowly. And these are steps through which you can get that consciousness. So, yes, it is tough, but not impossible. And desire and ambition are certainly there, but bring them slowly to a higher and higher level till the time you can actually be be aware of the fact that it's not your desire or ambition in the first place. You were attached to it, your ego got attached to it, but actually it is the divine that has led you and is leading you all the time. So when you have that sense of not being the doer, but and you're aware of the work being done by somebody else, then you have humility, you get out of the ego, and you have equality. Okay, so with that, shall we have 1 minute of concentration? I hope you spent the time reading and revising what we've already read. But okay, we start. Where do we start from? What page? The result of this knowledge? Is this where we stopped? Yes. Hmm. Let me start a paragraph before so that there's a continuity. The liberated man has no personal hopes. He does not seize on things as his personal possessions. He receives what the divine will brings him, covets nothing, is jealous of none. What comes to him he takes without repulsion and without attachment. What goes from him he allows to depart into the world of things without repining or grief or sense of loss. His heart and self are under perfect control. They are free from reaction and passion. They make no turbulent response to the touches of outward things. His action is indeed a purely physical action, shariram kevalam karma, for all else comes from above, is not generated on the human plane, is only a reflection of the will, knowledge, joy of the divine Purushottam. Therefore, he does not, by a stress on doing and its objects, bring about in his mind and heart any of those reactions which we call passion and sin. For sin consists not at all in the outward deed, but in an impure reaction of the personal will, mind, and heart, which accompanies it or causes it. The impersonal, the spiritual, is always pure, apapa vidham, and gives to all that it does its own inalienable purity. This spiritual impersonality is a third sign of the divine worker. All human souls, indeed, who have attained to a certain greatness and largeness, are conscious of an impersonal force, or love, or will and knowledge, working through them. But they are not free from egoistic reactions, sometimes violent enough, of their human personality. But this freedom the liberated soul has attained, for he has cast his personality into the impersonal. But this freedom the liberated soul has attained, for he has cast his personality into the impersonal, where it is no longer his, but is taken up by the divine person, the Purushottam, who uses all finite qualities infinitely and freely and is bound by none. He has become a soul and ceased to be a sum of natural qualities. And such appearance of personality as remains for the operations of nature is something unbound, large, flexible, universal. It is a free mold for the infinite. It is a living mask of the Purushottam. So this is the third quality that distinguishes uh, the divine worker. What is it? Spiritual impersonality. I think we read this last time. The result of this knowledge, this desirelessness, and this impersonality is a perfect equality in the soul and the nature. Equality is the fourth sign of the divine work. He has, says the Gita, passed beyond the dualities. He is Vatita. We have seen that he regards with equal eyes, without any disturbance of feeling, failure and success, victory and defeat. But not only these, all dualities are in him, surpassed and reconciled. The outward distinctions by which men determine their psychological attitude towards the happenings of the world have for him only a subordinate and instrumental meaning. He does not ignore them, but he is above them. Good happening and evil happening, so all important to human, um, good happening and evil happening, so all important to the human soul, subject to desire, are to the desireless divine soul equally welcome, since by their mingled strand are worked out the developing forms of the eternal good. There is a wonderful prayer here, which I think it really sums up what this chapter is saying, and especially it's a prayer actually written by the mother. It's called Radha's prayer. So it is the prayer of Radha to Sri Krishna. I'm sure some of you may have read it. O thou who art the Lord of my being and my God, receive my offering. Thine are all my thoughts, all my emotions, all my sensations, all the movements of my body, each cell of my body, each drop of my blood. I am absolutely and altogether thine, thine without reserve. For thou wilt of me that I shall be, whether thou choosest for me life or death, happiness or sorrow, success or failure, all that comes to me from thee shall be to me a gift divine, bringing with it the supreme felicity. So this prayer is really what this paragraph distinguishes. And it is the prayer of Radha. It is the prayer that can awaken in us that sense of self-giving, which is all important if one has to do and become the divine worker. In fact, I have, when I was working as a young student in Mirambika in 1989, Champaklalji in those days had come to the Sri Aurobindo ashram in Delhi. And I remember I went up to him and he handed me a scroll and it had that prayer, Radha's prayer. And when I first started reciting it, there was a lot of fear because, you're telling the divine anything you do is okay. If I die, if I live, if I have suffering, if I have pain, if I have success, I have failure, everything is yours. But slowly, when you keep reciting this prayer, it brings in something that changes your consciousness. So it is beautiful prayer. I would strongly recommend those who want to practice the Gita's yoga to read it. So this is the fourth sign of the divine worker. He is beyond this perfect equality in the soul, this equality without any disturbance of feeling, whether there's failure or success, victory or defeat. All these dualities are in him surpassed and reconciled. The outward distinctions by which men determine their psychological attitude towards the happenings of the world have for him only a subordinate and instrumental meaning. He does not ignore them, but he is above them. Good happening and evil happening, so all important to the human soul, subject to desire. So this good happening and evil happening, which is so important to us as the human beings, because we are all subject to desire. And that is the reason it is so important. To the desireless, divine soul, equally welcome. Since by their mingled strand are worked out the developing forms of the eternal good. He cannot be defeated, since all for him is moving towards the divine victory in the Kurukshetra of nature, Dharmashetra Kurukshetra, the field of doings, which is the field of the evolving dharma. And every turn of the conflict has been designed and mapped by the overseeing eye of the master of the battle, the Lord of works and the guide of the dharma. Honor and dishonor, honor and dishonor from men cannot move him, nor their praise, nor their blame, for he has a greater, clear, seeing judge, and another standard for his action, and his motive admits no dependence upon worldly rewards. So his motive admits no dependence upon worldly rewards. Look at the phraseology, look at the way this description is completely, isn't it, opposite of everything that the egoistic human being is normally used to, subject to. We live our lives with exactly the opposite motives. We live our lives with ambition, with desire, and here is somebody who is not moved at all by either. Now, this is the kind of consciousness that one needs to develop if one has to have that universalization, that of consciousness, that non-egoic consciousness, and have the divine consciousness come into one's being and inhabit it, so that you become an instrument of the divine, you're surrendered to the divine, and because of that surrender, that you can feel the workings of the divine force within you. So he cannot be defeated, since all for him is moving towards the divine victory in the Kurukshetra of nature, the field of doings, which is the field of the evolving dharma, and so on. Honor and dishonor from men cannot move him, nor their praise, nor their blame, for he has a greater, clear-seeing judge and another standard for his action, and his motive admits no dependence upon worldly rewards. Arjuna, the Kshatriya, prizes naturally honor and reputation, and is right in shunning disgrace and the name of coward as worse than death. For to maintain the point of honor and the standard of courage in the world is part of his dharma. But Arjuna, the liberated soul, need care for none of these things. He has only to know the kartavyam karma, the work which the Supreme Self, with a capital S, demands from him. Now that self, which is the divine self in him, the Supreme Self above, that work which he has been born to do, the work for which his soul has taken a birth in the human body to accomplish, that is the work that Arjuna needs to care about, and that is what he needs to focus his entire consciousness on. So this is important because this is the same that happens for all human beings who are on the path of Karma Yoga. He has passed even. And to do that and leave need care for none of these things. He has only to know the kartavyam karma, the work which the Supreme Self demands from him, and to do that and leave the result to the Lord of his actions. So to do that work which the Supreme Self demands from us and to leave the result to the Lord of his actions. He has passed even beyond that distinction of sin and virtue, which is so all important to the human soul. So he's even passed beyond the distinction, this is sin and this is virtue, which is so all important to the human soul, while it is struggling to minimize the hold of its egoism and lighten the heavy and violent yoke of its passions. The liberated has risen above these struggles and is seated firmly in the purity of the witnessing and enlightened soul. So this witnessing and enlightened soul. So that who is liberated, those who are liberated, they have risen above these struggles of the egoic, the hold of egoism and the heavy and violent yoke of passions, and are able to sit seated firmly in the purity of the witnessing and enlightened soul. Sin has fallen away from him, and not a virtue acquired and increased by good action and impaired or lost by evil action. But the inalienable and unalterable purity of a divine and selfless nature is the peak to which he has climbed and the seat upon which he is founded. So the unalterable purity of a divine and selfless nature is the peak to which he has climbed and the seat upon which he is founded. There the sense of sin and the sense of virtue have no starting point or applicability. So the sense of sin and sense of virtue have no starting point or applicability. He does it because this is what is his kartavyam karma. This is what the divine Lord that is seated within and without, this is what he has been born for, and therefore he's able to do it without the sense of sin and the sense of virtue. And therefore he's not caught in this moral conundrum or this excessive moral virtue, which is also a form of egoism, or sinfulness, which is a form of the tamasic ego, or the rajasic ego, or the sattvic ego, and so on. So both of these extremes are not, he's not interested in that. He goes beyond it and above it. So Arjuna, still in the ignorance, now he talks about Arjuna. Arjuna, still in the ignorance, may feel in his heart the call of right and justice, and may argue in his mind that abstention from battle would be a sin, entailing responsibility for all the suffering, and that injustice and oppression and the evil karma of the triumph of wrong bring upon men and nations. Or he may feel in his heart the recoil from violence and slaughter, and argue in his mind that all shedding of blood is a sin which nothing can justify. Both of these attitudes would appeal with equal right to virtue and reason, and it would depend upon the man, the circumstances, and the time, which of these might prevail in his mind or before the eyes of the world. Or he might simply feel constrained by his heart and his honor to support his friends against his enemies, and the cause of the good and the just against the cause of the evil and the oppressive. The liberated soul looks beyond these conflicting standards. So the Arjuna still in the ignorance. This is the operating phrase, still in the ignorance. So as long as one is in the ignorance, that is, one is subject to passions, subject to sentiments, subject to one's sensations, subject to one's desires, subject to one's ego. One always feels one or the other, and the mind justifies and gives very good reason, very moral and virtuous reasons to support one or the other idea. So it could be the idea here, in the case of Arjun, of either the idea that he must fight against injustice and oppression and the evil karma of the triumph of the wrong, which brings upon men and nations and so on. Or it could be the idea of that of the shedding of blood is a sin which nothing can justify, and therefore the recoil from violence and slaughter. Both these ideas have and attitudes would appeal with equal right to virtue and reason, and it would depend upon the man or the circumstances which prevail in his mind before the eyes of the world. Or, thirdly, he might feel constrained by his heart and his honor to support his friends against his enemies, the cause of the good and the just against the cause of the evil and the oppressive. So these are the three things. All are very virtuous. All can be argued by the reasonable mind and justified. So Arjun, in the ignorance, can do one or the other. However, the difference, the liberated soul looks beyond these conflicting standards. He sees simply only one thing, what the Supreme Self demands from him as needful for the maintenance, for the bringing forward of the evolving karma. He has no personal ends to serve, no personal loves and hatreds to satisfy, no rigidly fixed standard of action which opposes its rock line to the flexible advancing march of the progress of the human race or stands up defiant against the call of the infinite. He has no personal enemies to be conquered or slain, but sees only men who have been brought up against him by circumstances, and the will in things to help by their opposition the march of destiny. So, this is how the man who is liberated sees the same situation that Arjuna is in. What does he see? As he has no personal ends to serve, no personal loves and hatreds to satisfy, he has no personal enemies to be conquered or slain. Therefore, he only sees only men who have been brought up against him by circumstances, and the will in things to help by their opposition, this opposition of these men that have been brought up against him. What is this opposition going to be doing in the end? What is the larger purpose for it? The march of destiny, the march of evolution, the evolutionary nature that is working for progress of mankind. Against them, he can have no wrath or hatred, for wrath and hatred are foreign to the divine nature. So when he strikes, when he fights, when he kills, even though they be his own kin, he does not kill or fight with wrath or hatred, but because they are foreign to the divine nature. What does he fight? The asura's desire to break and slay what opposes him, the Rakshasa's grim lust of slaughter, are impossible to his calm and peace and his all-embracing sympathy and understanding. He has no wish to injure, but on the contrary, a universal friendliness and compassion. Maitriya, Maitriya Karuna Vivasam. But this compassion is that of a divine soul, overlooking men, embracing all other souls in himself, not the shrinking of the heart and the nerves and the flesh, which is the ordinary human form of pity. Nor does he attach a supreme importance to the life of the body, but looks beyond to the life of the soul and attaches to the other only an instrumental value. He will not hasten to slaughter and strife, but if war comes in the wave of the dharma, he will accept it with a large equality and a perfect understanding and sympathy for those whose power and pleasure of domination he has to break, and whose joy of triumphant life he has to destroy. For in all he sees two things. What are these two things? The divine inhabiting every being equally, the varying manifestation, unequal only in its temporary circumstances. In the animal and man, in the dog, the unclean outcast, and the learned and virtuous Brahmin, in the saint and the sinner, in the indifferent and the friendly and the hostile, in those who love him and benefit, and those who hate him and afflict. He sees himself, he sees God, and has a heart, and has at heart for all the same equal kindliness. So in all of these, in the indifferent, in the friendly, in the hostile, in those who hate him and afflict, those who love him, he sees God and has at heart for all the same equal kindliness, the same divine affection. Circumstances may determine the outward clasp or the outward conflict. So circumstances may determine the outward clasp or conflict, but can never affect his equal eye, his open heart, his inner embrace of all. And in all his actions, there will be the same principle of soul, a perfect equality, and the same principle of work, the will of the divine in him, active for the need of the race, in its gradually developing advance towards the Godhead. Again, the sign of the divine worker is that which is central to the divine consciousness itself. A perfect inner joy and peace, which depends upon nothing in the world for its source or its continuance. It is innate. It is the very stuff of the soul's consciousness. It is the very nature of divine being. So again, the sign of the divine worker. This is which sign? How many signs is this? The fourth? The fifth? Okay, the fifth sign is this perfect inner joy and peace, which does not depend on anything in the world for that peace or joy to manifest, to be, for its source or its continuance. It is innate. It is just this lovely, beautiful, perfect peace and inner joy that is innate. It is the very stuff of the soul's consciousness. It is the very nature of divine being. The ordinary man depends upon outward things for his happiness. Yes? The ordinary man depends upon outward things for his happiness. Therefore, he has desire. Therefore, he has anger and passion when these things are not fulfilled and when he does not get what he wants or when they're taken away from him. So, the ordinary man depends upon outward things for his happiness. So think about it yourself. What are the outward things that you depend upon for your happiness? Okay? Right? So to understand this better. And if they're taken away from you, all these things, what happen? So the ordinary man depends upon outward things for his happiness. Therefore he has desire. Therefore he has anger and passion, pleasure and pain, joy and grief. Therefore he measures all things in the balance of good fortune and evil fortune. None of these things can affect the divine soul. It is ever satisfied without any kind of dependence. Nitya tripto, nirasha, for its delights, its divine ease, its happiness, its glad light, are eternal within. Ingrained in itself, Atmarati, Anthasukha, antarasmas, rathantra jyotir ivaya. What joy it takes in outward things is not for their sake. What joy it takes in outward things. So it doesn't mean that you don't take joy in outward things. It doesn't mean that you don't participate and enjoy life and that you delight in everything that you have or that you're doing or that comes to you. That is not what he's saying. What is he saying? So he's saying something else. What joy it takes in outward things is not for their sake, not for things which it seeks in them and can miss, but for the self in them, for their expression of the divine, for that which is eternal in them and which it cannot miss. So the joy that it takes in outward things is not for them, for the sake of the things themselves, but for the sake of the divine and delight that is within them, and that it sees and seeks in them and can not for things which it seeks in them and can miss, but for the self in them, for their expression of the divine, for that which is eternal in them and which it cannot miss. It is without attachment to their outward touches, but finds it is without attachment to their outward touches, but finds everywhere the same joy that it finds in itself, because itself is theirs, has become one self with the self of all beings, because it is united with the one and equal Brahman in them through all their differences. Brahma Yoga Yuktatma Sarvabhut Bhutatma Bhutatma. Okay, so it does not rejoice in the touches of, it does not rejoice in the touches of the pleasant or feel anguish in the touches of the unpleasant. So neither does it rejoice in the touches of the pleasant, nor feel anguish in the touches of the unpleasant, neither the wounds of things, nor the wounds of friends, nor the wounds of enemies can disturb the firmness of its outgazing mind or bewilder its receiving heart. This soul is in its nature, as the Upanishad put it. Arvanam, Arvanam without wound or scar. In all things, it has the same imperishable Ananda. Sukha Akshyam Ashnuti. Okay? Sukha Akshyam Ashnuti. So this is the imperishable Ananda that it feels in all things. It has the same imperishable Ananda. It does not get disturbed, and therefore it does not rejoice in the touches of the pleasant, feel anguish in the touches of the unpleasant. Neither the wounds of things, nor the wounds of friends, nor the wounds of enemies can disturb the firmness of its outgazing mind, bewilder its receiving heart. This soul is in its nature, as the Upanishad puts it, Arvana, without wound or scar. So that equality, impersonality, peace, joy, freedom, do not depend on so outward a thing as doing or not doing works. The Gita insists repeatedly on the difference between the inward and the outward renunciation, tyaga and sannyasa. So the difference between the inward renunciation and the outward renunciation. The inward renunciation is tyaga, and the outward renunciation is called sannyasa. The latter, it says, sannyasa, the outward renunciation, is valueless without the former, the inner renunciation, which is tyaga. The outer, it says, is valueless without the former, hardly possible even to attain without it, and unnecessary when there is the inward freedom. So the outer, it says it's even unnecessary when there is the inward freedom of tyaga. In fact, tyaga itself is the real and sufficient sannyas. So tyaga itself is the real and sufficient sannyasa, He should be known as the eternal sannyasi, who neither hates nor desires. Free from the dualities, he is happily and easily released from all bondage. So I think we can take this up next time. Yes, so we end here today. 185. Here is the real meat of the whole Gita that is written in this chapter. This is the practice, this is the whole conceptual framework of practice, and nothing could be more clearly explained than the way that Sri Aurobindo has gone into this whole idea of the signs of the divine worker and how to attain it and what is the process of this karma yoga. Any questions, comments, or revelations? Please go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. Sorry, I keep on having questions. Um, if you have a family and you have extended family members, and of course you want the best for them, how can you release yourself from all bondage? Because, I mean, you love them, you care about them, you want the best for them, but you also feel tied to them emotionally,
Hmm.
physically, mentally.
Yes, very, very good question. Who would like to answer? Right?
Should I answer?
Yes, Akshay?
So I so I believe you have to get an empty space, empty time, free up your time while walking, while doing your home course work. Try to get the constant remembrance in you. So once you have been doing a yoga, after some time you will able to get it in your state of mind that who is disturbing you, who is not disturbing you. So effectively, if you have your own free time during night, during early mornings, when you're preparing your own meal. So this is how you should be able to know that there is a pure soul that is with you, and you should not worry about the other family members who are with you, and they are also under him only. So he should be taking care of all the things.
So basically, he's saying through contemplation, finding time to go within, to create in one's spirit, and so on. Yes. Any other answers? How does one get, when you are with a family and you have your responsibilities, how do you free yourself from those ties? Yeah, because there is attachment, because you want the best for them, and yet you want to do your own, you want to go on your own spiritual journey. Is that your question? See, Avina?
Yes, it is. And but I just wanted to add to something to that. I have been working on this for the last, I would say, 20 years. And contemplation is one of them, but still you get dragged into it, or
Mm,
especially when you see them going through a, I guess, a challenging
yes.
time, and you see further than that because you've worked on yourself, because you've read, because you're aware, you're intuitive, all of those things. It's very easy. That's why I find it very hard to release myself from that bondage, because you can
Mm.
try, but but from, I guess, from month to month is very easy, but from day to day kind of living, it's a lot harder. It's easier said than done.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That goes without saying. It's much easier said than done. Um, I would say maybe create boundaries for interaction, even within the family. Because I feel the all right. So there is a somebody who says she creates boundaries for herself even within the family, which help. But that helps to some degree. Yes, you need to do these outer things. But the real practice needs time. It needs a lot of time, and it needs something in your inner being has to want it very much, and it pushes you towards it, so that you suffocate when you are not able to be in touch with your inmost self, or your inner, your true self, you can say. And that suffocation helps you then to find it. And the moment you are in touch with your soul and yourself, you become in touch with the soul of others. It happens automatically. And then what happens is that you get into a sense of peace. But again, you get disturbed, right? Because you can't maintain it. And then when you get disturbed again, you have to once again practice how to get back. So I think this oscillation between um, you know a sense of equanimity and um, inwardness and joy, and this disruption of that continues till a time when you are able to, over time, then have more of the equanimity, inner peace, and um, uh, you know, sense of well-being without any external stimuli, do not get disturbed with the disturbances of those who live around you. Their disturbance does not disturb you anymore. You're able to hold your own state of equanimity and joy and peace. And this duration then begins to become longer. And then there will come a time when that becomes the established um, manner in which you live, but it requires tapasya, and it requires what Sri Krishna says, Tyaga, which is inner renunciation, each time when to become conscious, to become more and more conscious of when when you're acting out of attachment, when you're allowing your attachment to overtake and your desires to overtake, or your passions to overtake your the truth of yourself, and that inner equanimity or that divine presence in you. So this is the practice, but I can say that reading the Gita and keep reading it, having a prayer that helps you to every morning praying, keep a prayer for yourself. I can only share mine, and I recited it. I recite this prayer 8 or 10 times a day before I start something, because this is the only prayer that makes me get out of myself and give myself to the divine completely. So find a prayer for yourself or a mantra for yourself each time whenever you get disturbed or get out of your depth. That can help you to come back. But it is a lifetime's yoga. No shortcuts.
Thank you.
Okay. So, shall we end with that? Yes. 1 minute of concentration. Very good evening. Let's begin where we ended. We were reading the chapter called the Divine Worker. Um, chapter 18, page 185, but we'll start from page 184. Again, the sign of the Divine Worker. This is one of the most important chapters we're reading now. And of course, as you see, we have been reading on the different signs. How do you distinguish an ordinary worker, a worker or a human being doing works, but from his ego and from his personal desire, and a worker or a person doing works from a higher consciousness, uh, as a representative of the divine, as under the influence and instruction of the divine. And these are some of the signs to distinguish, because outwardly works may be exactly the same. Two people might do the same work, and yet have different consequences. There was a question asked just now about karmic reaction, that even if Arjuna kills, would there be a karmic reaction on him because he is killing his kith and kin because of the law of karma? But that does not happen for the divine worker because of these very reasons, because he is working under the instruction of the Supreme Being of Sri Krishna. He is working as his Aadhar, as his instrument, and he's working without desire, without anger, with equality of consciousness, because that is what he has been asked to do. And therefore, the karmic reaction and retribution will not come on Arjuna so much as it will on the Kauravas, because they are the ones who initiated the struggle. The perpetrators are not only that, hundreds of times peace offerings, and uh, they tried every possible route to try and avoid war, but that was not happening because they were not listening. So, for the Yuga Dharma, for the evolution of the earth, for the evolution of consciousness, for the world to progress, this had to take place. So we start from here, page 184. Again, the sign of the divine worker is that which is central. Again, the sign of the divine worker is that which is central to the divine consciousness itself, a perfect inner joy and peace, which depends upon nothing in the world for its source or its continuance. It is innate. It is the very stuff of the soul's consciousness. It is the very nature of divine being. The ordinary man depends upon outward things for his happiness. Therefore, he has desire. Therefore, he has anger and passion, pleasure and pain, joy and grief. Therefore, he measures all things in the balance of good fortune and ill and evil fortune, because he depends upon outward things for his happiness. None of these things can affect the divine soul. It is ever satisfied, without any kind of dependence. Nitya tripto nirash, nirashre, for its delight, its divine ease, its happiness, its glad light are eternal within, ingrained in itself. Atmarati, Anthasukha, Natar, something. Jyotir Eva Yahas. Those who know Sanskrit can read that. What joy it takes in outward things is not for their sake. Okay? So, what joy it takes in outward things is not for their sake, but not for things which it seeks in them and can miss, but for the self in them, for their expression of the divine, for that which is eternal in them and which it cannot miss. It is without attachment to their outward touches, but finds everywhere the same joy that it finds in itself, because its self is theirs, has become one self with the self of all beings, because it is united with the one and equal Brahman in them through all their differences. Brahma Yoga, Yuktatma, Sarvabhutatma, Bhutatma. So basically, what he's saying is that because of the identification of the divine worker and the divine soul with the divine consciousness, this identity makes him feel and experience that all souls are in him and he is in all. And therefore, he doesn't feel this segregation and barrier of what is mine and what is yours. So that helps, that avoids, it stops him from um, experiencing what we normally are experiencing, a sense of division. And the joy he takes is not an outward for the things itself, not for them and so on, but for the self in them, the divine consciousness. And irrespective of whatever outward works, outer pleasure or pain or suffering or fame or name or whatever happens outwardly, good fortune and evil fortune, he has this inner ananda because of his identity with the divine. He does not rejoice in the touches of the pleasant or feel anguish in the touches of the unpleasant, neither the wounds of things, nor the wounds of friends, nor the wounds of enemies can disturb the firmness of its outgazing mind or bewilder its receiving heart. This soul is in its nature, as the Upanishad puts it, avranam, without wound or scar. In all things, it has the same imperishable ananda. Sukham akashyam ashnoti, that equality, impersonality, peace, joy, freedom, that do not depend on so outward a thing as doing or not doing works. So none of this, equality, impersonality, peace, joy, freedom, depends on whether he is doing works or not doing works. The Gita insists repeatedly on the difference between the inward and the outward renunciation. This is important, and this is very central to understanding what renunciation means and the Gita's definition and understanding of Tyaga and Sannyasa. So, Tyaga is, what is it? It's an inward renunciation. And what is Sannyasa? It is an outward renunciation. The latter, it says, is valueless without the former. Hardly possible even to attain without it, and unnecessary when there is the inward freedom. So, what does the Gita say? That it says that it's necessary to become a sannyasi when there is an inward freedom. One need not then give up and become and become a mendicant. The reason is because if everyone did that, what would happen to the world and its evolutionary future? So it is not. It is unnecessary. But if somebody is it's in his dharma. If that is the dharma of his nature, then of course. In fact, Tyaga itself is the real and sufficient sannyas. He should be known as the eternal sannyasin who neither hates nor desires. Free from the dualities, he is happily and easily released from all bondage. So free from the dualities of all joy and grief, suffering and so on, evil fortune and good fortune, he is free from the dualities. He should be known as the eternal sannyasin who neither hates nor desires. Free from the dualities, he is happily and easily released from bondage. The painful process of outward sannyas, dukkham aptum, is an unnecessary process. Please note, The painful process of outward sannyas is an unnecessary process. It is perfectly true that all actions, as well as the fruit of action, have to be given up, to be renounced, but inwardly renounced, not outwardly, not with the inertia, the tamas of nature, but to the Lord in sacrifice, into the calm and joy of the impersonal, from whom all action proceeds without disturbing his peace. The true sannyasa of action is the reposing of all works on the Brahman. So, what is the true sannyas of action? When you have this inward tyaga, it is the reposing of all works in the Brahman, on the Brahman. He, in quotation marks, he who, having abandoned attachment, acts reposing or founding his works on the Brahman, Brahman yadhyay karmani, is not stained by sin, even as water clings not to the lotus leaf. So he who, having abandoned attachment, founds his works on the Brahman is not stained by sin, even as water clings not to the lotus leaf. Therefore, the yogins first do works with the body, mind, understanding, or even merely with the organs of action, abandoning attachment for self-purification. So therefore, the yogins first do works with the body. They do the works with the body, mind, understanding, or even the organs of action, but they abandon attachment for self-purification. Okay? Sangam tyaktvat vasudhe. By abandoning attachment to the fruit of works. So by abandoning attachment to the fruit of works, the soul in union with Brahman attains to peace. So when one abandons attachment to the fruits, then what happens to the soul? It is in union with the Brahman and attains to peace, or wrapped foundation in Brahman. But the soul not in union is attached to the fruit and bound by the action of desire. The foundation, the purity, the peace once attained, the embodied soul perfectly controlling its nature, having renounced all its actions by the mind, inwardly, not outwardly, sits in its nine-gated city. Nine-gated city, neither doing nor causing to be done. So then what happens? So this foundation, purity and peace, once it is attained, the embodied soul in the human body, perfectly controlling its nature, having renounced all its actions by the mind inwardly. So they renounced all its actions by the mind inwardly, not outwardly. Continues to act, but renounces this attachment for it inwardly, sits in its nine-gated city, neither doing nor causing to be done. So what is this nine-gated city a reference to, Anuradha?
These are the 9 openings, like the nostrils, the eyes, all the various openings
Nine.
come to 9.
So sits in his nine-gated city, neither doing nor causing to be done. So this soul is the one impersonal soul in all, the all-pervading Lord, Prabhu. So this soul it is the one impersonal soul in all. So it is the Jivatman, the universal soul, that he is in that consciousness, the all-pervading Lord, Prabhu, Vibhu, who, as the impersonal, neither creates the works of the world, nor the mind's idea of being the doer, na kartavyam, na karmani. So neither does he know na kartavyam, na karmani, not nor the coupling of works to their fruits, the chain of cause and effect. All that is worked out. So here it is, chain of cause and effect. So there is no chain of cause and effect, no coupling of works, and this because he is seated in this vast impersonal consciousness of the Jivatman, of the impersonal soul. For this soul is the one impersonal soul in all, the all-pervading Lord, Prabhu, Vibhu, who, as the impersonal, neither creates the works of the world, nor the mind's idea of being the doer, and nor the coupling of works to their fruits, the chain of cause and effect. All that is worked out by the nature in the man, Swabhava, his principle of self-becoming, as the word literally means. The all-pervading impersonal accepts neither the sin nor the virtue of any. These are things created by the ignorance in the creature, by his egoism of the doer, by his ignorance of his highest self, by his involution in the operations of nature, and so on. So the all-pervading impersonal accepts neither the sin nor the virtue of any. This concept of sin and virtue does not exist in the impersonal Brahman. It is created, man-made, created by the egoism of the doer, by his ignorance of his highest self, by his involution in the operations of nature, and when the self-knowledge within him is released from this dark envelope, that knowledge lights up like a sun, the real self within him. So are you clear? Is this clear? So, the all-pervading impersonal accepts neither the sin nor the virtue of any. These are things created by the ignorance in the creature, by the egoism of the doer, by his ignorance of his highest self, by his involution in the operations of nature, and when the self-knowledge within him is released from the dark envelope, that knowledge lights up like a sun, the real self within him. He knows himself then to be the soul supreme above the instruments of nature, pure, infinite, inviolable, immutable. He is no longer affected. No longer does he imagine himself to be modified by her workings. By complete identification with the impersonal, he can too release himself from the necessity of returning by birth into her movement. So, this complete identification then takes place as a culmination of the of the of the um, of the different stages and signs of the divine consciousness that acts uh, in the adhara. He becomes totally free. He becomes totally free within. He becomes totally identified with the supreme consciousness, with the Brahman. And when he identifies his consciousness with the Brahman, he is no longer uh, um, in the ignorance and is no longer subject to this human concept of sin or virtue, what is right and what is wrong, by his egoism, which normally happens to those who are still in the egoism of the doer. And when this self-knowledge within him is released from this dark envelope, that knowledge lights up like a sun, the real self within him. He knows himself, and then to be what? The soul supreme above the instruments of nature. So his consciousness then sits and is stationed in his impersonal self, is in complete union with the divine. And therefore, he is aware of himself not as the ego, not as a small person, but as an instrument and as a child of the divine, in the divine consciousness. He is no longer affected, no longer does he imagine himself to be modified by her working, by nature prakriti. By complete identification with the impersonal, he can too release himself from the necessity of returning by birth into her movement. And if he so wishes, he can then decide that he doesn't wish to take on another human birth. And yet, this liberation does not at all prevent him from acting. So, it would seem quite inevitable that one has reached the supreme consciousness, one is living in the impersonal Brahman, one has the consciousness of the Jivatman, one is identified with the supreme will, one is acting from his, the supreme will is guiding one and one is acting from that consciousness. Why would one need to act? Because one would be totally free and one may decide, okay, one that he doesn't need to act. But yet this liberation does not at all prevent him from acting. Only he knows that it is not he who is active, but the modes, the qualities of nature, her triple gunas. The only difference is he will act, but he is aware that the action is done. It is not he who is acting, but the modes and the qualities of nature, her triple gunas. Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. The man who knows the principles of things thinks his mind in yoga with the inactive impersonal. So that man who knows the principle of things thinks his mind in yoga with the inactive impersonal, the Brahman. I am doing nothing. When he sees, hears, touches, smells, eats, moves, sleeps, breathes, speaks, takes, ejects, opens his eyes or closes them, he holds that it is only the senses acting upon the objects of the senses. This is in quotation mark, a direct translation of the Sanskrit shloka. I am doing nothing. When he sees, hears, touches, smells, eats, moves, sleeps, breathes, speaks, takes, ejects, opens his eyes or closes them, he holds that it is only the senses acting. He holds meaning he is aware that it is only the senses that are acting upon the objects of the senses. He himself, safe in the immutable, unmodified soul, is beyond the grip of the three gunas. So he is separated, he is in the Purusha. He is aware that he is not Prakriti who is acting. He can see that when he is acting, it is the modes of nature, modes of Prakriti that are acting. But he is self-aware and he is of the divine, of the Brahman in which he sits. He is seated in the impersonal and he is seated in the Purusha. So I am doing nothing. And yet the action is happening through him and he is acting. He himself, safe in the immutable, unmodified soul, is beyond the grip of the three gunas. Three gun three gunna tita. He is neither sattvic, neither is he rajasic nor tamasic. He sees with a clear, untroubled spirit the alterations of the natural modes and qualities in his action. So he sees with a clear, untroubled spirit the alternations of the natural modes of the three gunas and qualities in his action. He is observing, he is self-aware, he is the witness soul that is seeing Prakriti acting and is witnessing the three gunas, sattva, tamas, and rajas acting in him and through him. But he is not identified with that action and therefore he is seated in the Purusha. And therefore he is not subject to uh, the tribulations of the gunas. He is neither sattvic, rajasic, nor tamasic. He sees with a clear, untroubled spirit the alternations of the natural modes and qualities in his action, their rhythmic play of light and happiness, activity and force, rest and inertia. This superiority of the calm soul, observing its action but not involved in it. This superiority of the calm soul, observing its action but not involved in it, this Tregunya Titya is also the high sign of the divine worker. So this is another sign of the divine sign. Tregunya Titya. That is, he is aware, he is observing, he is calm, and he is not involved in the action that he is himself undertaking. So in this case, Arjuna is seated in his soul. He is killing, he is fighting, he is participating with, and is aware of all the three gunas that are acting through him and in him, and yet he is um, superior to all those, untroubled. Yeah, and not involved. He sees with a clear, untroubled spirit, so on. This superiority of the calm soul, observing its action but not involved in it, is also a high sign of the divine worker. By itself, the idea might lead to a doctrine of the mechanical. So, by itself, if you looked at it, then you say, okay, it could lead to the mechanical determination of nature and the perfect aloofness and irresponsibility of the soul. But the Gita effectively avoids this fault of an insufficient thought by its illumining supertheistic idea of the Purushottama. It makes it clear that it is not in the end nature which mechanically determines its own action. It is the will of the Supreme which inspires nature. So you could then say, oh, if he's so calm and aloof and watching, it is basically nature that is doing it and determining everything. But because of the idea of the Purushottama, the divine being, the divine self that is seated in the human being, and he is aware of that Purushottama, that it is the Purushottama that is guiding the soul, the human instrument, to take a particular course of action and not another. So it makes it clear that it is not in the end nature which mechanically determines its own action. It is the will of the Supreme which inspires her. He who has already slain, he, that is Krishna, who has already slain the Dhritarashtrans, he of whom Arjuna is only the human instrument, a universal soul, a transcendent Godhead, is the master of her labor. So he is an instrument, like a fork and a knife of the human soul. The Dhritarashtrans have already been killed by Sri Krishna, as he tells Arjuna. So you see, that is why it is the Purushottama that guides the soul. It is not that he is allowing nature to do whatever it wants, Prakriti, and is totally subject to the action of the three gunas. So, yet he is aware of the. Sorry, someone speaking?
Yeah, yeah. So there was a line, so it missed the continuity. So he is neither sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. He sees with a clear, untroubled spirit. There is a rhythmically of light and happiness.
Yes.
So how could a light and emotions are attached? Active, yeah, active and force, rest and inertia. So rhythmically of light. So what does it mean? Rhythmic. What's rhythm?
Hmm. So he says he is neither sattvic, rajasic, nor tamasic. He sees with a clear, untroubled spirit the alternations of the natural modes and qualities in his action, their rhythmic play. So he sees the rhythmic play of light and happiness, that is sattva. He sees the play of sattva, activity and force, sees the play of rajas. It's just the English translation of the three, sattva, rajasic, and tamas. Rest and inertia is tamas. So he sees the play of the three gunas in him, but he is not subject to them. He is not involved in them. He does not lose himself in that. That's what it's saying. So this superiority of the calm observing soul, this superiority of the calm soul Observing its action but not involved in it is also a high sign of the divine worker. By itself, the idea might lead to a doctrine of the mechanical determination of nature and the perfect aloofness and irresponsibility of the soul, but the Gita effectively avoids this fault of an insufficient thought by its illumining supertheistic idea of the Purushottam. What is supertheistic idea? What does supertheistic mean? Theistic is?
I think going beyond
Supertheistic.
the gods and something above the very
Yeah, so it goes beyond by its illumining supertheistic idea of the Purushottam. Yeah, so theistic, supertheistic is? Yeah, so this Purushottam that is involved, it is in and out. It's a Purushottam. That idea of the Purusha is the supreme Purusha. Yeah, the Jivat, which is above and within. That is that because of that idea, it goes beyond the idea of a mechanical determination of nature. It makes it clear that it is not in the end nature which mechanically determines its own action. It is the will of the Supreme which inspires it. So, in the end, it is not nature, not Prakriti that mechanically determines its own action. It is the will of the Supreme, the Purusha, which inspires her. He who has already slain the Dhritarashtra, he of whom Arjuna is only the human instrument, a universal soul, a transcendent Godhead, is the master of her labor. The reposing of works in the impersonal is a means of getting rid of the personal egoism of the doer. So, the reposing of works in the impersonal is a very effective means of getting rid of the personal egoism of the doer. Otherwise, one keeps falling back on even though one knows mentally that one is not the doer, but the consciousness is unable to maintain that poise of knowingness or understanding, and one keeps falling back into the idea of the personal egoism of the doer unless one reposes in the impersonal, in the Purusha, in that which is the witness self, that which is uninvolved. So, only when you are able to take that poise of consciousness of the Purusha, then can you be free from the workings of Prakriti. Okay? So the reposing of works in the impersonal is a means of getting rid of the personal egoism of the doer. But the end is to give up all our actions to that great Lord of all. But the end is to give up, to sacrifice, to make sacred all our actions to that great Lord of all, Sarva Loka Maheshwara, with a consciousness identified with the self, renouncing all thy actions into me, Mai Sarvani Karmani, Sanyasa Adhiyatma, Setasha, freed from personal hopes and desires, freed from personal hopes and desires, from the thought of I and mine, delivered from the fever of the soul. Right. So this one word, one line with a consciousness, this is what Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, with a consciousness identified with the self, with the Purusha, renouncing all your actions into me, freed from personal hopes and desires, from the thought of I and mine, delivered from the fever of the soul, fight, work, do my will in the world. The divine motives, it is the divine who motivates, inspires, determines the entire action. The human soul, impersonal in the Brahman, is the pure and silent channel of his power. That power in the nature executes the divine movement. Such only are the works of the liberated soul, mukteshya, mukteshya karma. Such only are the works of the liberated soul, for in nothing does he act from a personal inception. The liberated soul does not act from a personal inception, from a personal reason, from a personal desire, from a personal motive. He is inspired and determined. All his entire action is inspired, motived, and determined by the Brahman, the impersonal Brahman. Okay? Such are the actions, such only are the works of the liberated soul, for in nothing does he act from a personal inception. Such are the actions of the accomplished Karma Yogin. They rise, they rise from a free spirit and disappear without modifying it, like waves that rise and disappear on the surface of conscious, immutable depths. Gata sanghasya muktasya jnana vashishta chetasaha yagna yagnaya karataha karma sangham samagram pravilyate. So this is the most, most, as you know, Sri Krishna is teaching Arjuna on the battlefield. And he is slowly through the Gita, from chapter to chapter, slowly taking him, stage by stage, doesn't push it all onto him in the beginning, taking him from one sign to the other sign, preparing him inwardly to become the divine worker, so that he may do his work and his will, and do the will of the Supreme Purushottam in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So, wonderful gospel of divine works, and absolutely, this is what the Gita has given the entire world, a way of action, a way of living in the world, and yet being free from the, uh, yes, free uh, um, from the egoic consciousness, from the retributions of what might happen. Because one is free, one can act in a way that is in complete alignment with what the divine Purusha has has designated for one, what is one's swabhava and swadharma. So with that, we close this week's chapter on the divine worker. Any questions or reflections or anything else that anyone would like to add? Please go ahead. The next we come to equality, of course. There's a mention of equality in this chapter, but it would be useful for us all to read this chapter again and go step by step, marking out all the signs and also seeing the progression, because it doesn't come um, simultaneously. There is a progression that has slowly been explored in this chapter, and in the end, this is what happens. So it is worth reading it again with this complete idea of seeing that, okay, what are the steps to be taken? How does one prepare oneself? How did Arjuna, how did Sri Krishna prepare Arjuna? And then, of course, we go to the most important chapter, equality, because Sri Aurobindo's own yoga, the cornerstones of his yoga is samatha, equality, and equanimity. And I think this is something very close to his own heart, and the Gita, of course, has given it extreme importance. Okay, so with that, we meditate for 1 minute. Any questions or reflections?
So, ma'am, from this chapter, we understand that one, so when you do not renunciate your attachment to something, then whatever you renunciate from outside does not make sense or it is unnecessary. And therefore, one does not necessarily have to do sannyas if they are doing tyaga. I mean,
one doesn't need to give up the world and an action if one is doing an inner renunciation or a tyaga.
So the inner is more important.
The inner is more important than the outer.
So let's say I'm doing something and I earn money or I
earn money.
Yeah. I don't have to reject it or give it away or not use it. But the attachment to it, that if I don't have it or if I wasn't given what I expected or something, that attachment has to be let go, not the money itself or not the
Yeah. Which is the attachment to the money. It is the attachment to and the fear and the desire and all that accompanies it. That has to be given up. And to use it as an instrument of the divine. But then to you be able to use it as an instrument of the divine, one has to go through a process of self-purification to understand what is the divine's will. I mean, we don't know, most of us, right? We're living in the ego. So what is the divine's will in us? For that, some sort of self-purification, some sort of sadhana, some sort of self-offering of one's works. That is the way to start the sadhana. Remember and offer. In the morning, every morning, offer your works to the divine consciousness, to the Lord. That way, slowly your consciousness becomes less and less egoistic. It takes time. Okay, so we have 1 minute of concentration. Next time.